Native American households in the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds were filled with items that seemed ordinary at the time. What families kept in closets and storage areas is now worth fortunes to collectors who understand their cultural significance. Here are 25 vintage items from Native American households that families who lived through this era will never forget. Original ceremonial regalia and dance outfits from the 1,970 seconds have become some of the most valuable cultural collectibles in Native American history. Traditional jingle dresses, fancy dance outfits, and grass dance regalia with intricate beadwork now sell for thousands of dollars at specialty auctions. What families once stored carefully after powwows are now prized possessions that collectors and cultural institutions hunt relentlessly. The craftsmanship visible in vintage dance regalia has skyrocketed in value over the decades. Original pieces featuring complex beadwork patterns, featherwork, and traditional materials have fetched prices that would stun the original owners. For Native families who commissioned these pieces from master craftspeople, the regalia they preserved have transformed from dance outfits into genuine investments. Items that can be traced to specific renowned makers command premium prices. Collectors understand that these pieces represented more than performance wear. They were cultural expressions that preserved Native identity and artistic traditions for an entire generation. Vintage powwow recordings from the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds have become incredibly valuable to collectors worldwide. Original recordings of northern and southern drum groups on vinyl and reel-to-reel tape now sell for hundreds or thousands of dollars, depending on condition. Native families who kept their original recording collections are sitting on fortunes they may not realize. The distinctive Canyon Records label and other early Native music imprints are instantly recognizable to collectors who pay premium prices for authentic pressings. Recordings that were played at gatherings and ceremonies have transformed from entertainment into investments. Promotional copies and limited releases command even higher prices due to their rarity. For grandparents who carefully stored their music collections instead of throwing them away, those decisions are now paying dividends. The authentic sound of original drum recordings cannot be replicated by modern reissues, which is why collectors pay top dollar for recordings from the golden era of powwow music documentation. Vintage copies of Akwesasne Notes and other Native newspapers from the 1,960 seconds through the 1,980 seconds have become collectible pieces of Native American history. Issues covering the occupation of Alcatraz, Wounded Knee, and fishing rights battles now sell for substantial amounts to collectors and institutions. Families who saved stacks of these publications are discovering that certain issues have appreciated dramatically. The Akwesasne Notes format documented Native life and resistance in ways mainstream publications ignored. Issues featuring activist movements and those that recorded historic treaty battles command premium prices. Complete runs from specific decades have sold at auction for thousands of dollars. Libraries, museums, and private collectors actively seek out these publications because they represent irreplaceable documentation of Native American political organizing that cannot be found anywhere else. Antique Pendleton blankets in traditional Native patterns have become highly sought after by collectors. Original blankets from the early 1900s through the 1,970 seconds in ceremonial designs have sold for thousands of dollars at estate sales. The distinctive patterns created specifically for Native communities, such as Chief Joseph and Harding designs, represent collaborations between the Pendleton Company and tribal communities. Collectors prize the quality of vintage Pendleton wool, which was manufactured using techniques that created superior warmth and durability. Native families who inherited these blankets from their elders often do not realize they own valuable textiles. The wear patterns and natural aging add to both the authenticity and collector value. Specific pattern names, sizes, and condition help experts identify the most valuable pieces. What once seemed like ordinary household blankets are now recognized as both functional art and cultural history worth preserving. Original pottery and beadwork from renowned native artists of the mid-20th century have appreciated significantly as cultural artifacts. Pieces by Maria Martinez, Lucy Lewis, and other master potters from San Ildefonso, Acoma, and other pueblos now sell for tens of thousands of dollars. Families who purchased pottery directly from artists decades ago are holding priceless pieces. Traditional beadwork on leather, including moccasins, vests, and ceremonial items crafted by skilled artisans, has become extremely collectible. Vintage pieces showing traditional tribal patterns and expert craftsmanship command premium prices compared to modern work. Families who inherited these items often do not realize their artistic and monetary value. Each piece represents hours of skilled labor using techniques passed down through generations. The cultural significance combined with authentic craftsmanship has turned these household items into museum-quality pieces of Native American art history. Traditional Kachina dolls carved by Hopi artisans from the mid-20th century have become extremely valuable to collectors. Authentic Kachinas created by master carvers from the 1,950 seconds through the 1,980 seconds now sell for substantial sums at auction. Families who purchase these sacred representations directly from carvers are holding pieces of irreplaceable spiritual and artistic history. Original cottonwood root carvings with natural pigments and traditional styling command premium prices. Photographs documenting the carvers and provenance increase value significantly. Kachinas representing specific spiritual beings and ceremonies are especially prized by serious collectors. Items that can be attributed to renowned Hopi carving families fetch extraordinary prices. Museums and private collectors actively seek these pieces because they represent both artistic excellence and deep cultural meaning. What some families displayed as cultural decorations have become important documents of Hopi spiritual and artistic traditions that must be preserved for future generations. Vintage silver and turquoise jewelry from master Navajo, Zuni, and Hopi silversmiths has become surprisingly valuable. Pieces created by artists like Charles Laloma, Kenneth Begay, and other mid-century masters are now sought after by serious collectors. The squash blossom necklaces, concho belts, and bracelets that were everyday adornments have transformed into investment pieces. Original pieces in good condition, especially those that can be attributed to specific artists, can sell for thousands of dollars. The designs range from traditional patterns to innovative mid-century modern interpretations that influenced contemporary native jewelry. Native families who inherited pieces from parents and grandparents are discovering their unexpected value. Hallmarks and maker's marks help authenticate pieces and establish provenance. Collectors prize examples with exceptional craftsmanship or unusual designs. What seemed like family jewelry has transformed into museum-quality Native American art representing the golden age of Southwest silverwork. Native American championship buckles and awards from tribal fairs and competitions have become some of the most valuable Western collectibles. Original championship buckles from all Indian rodeos, hand game tournaments, and cultural competitions sell for thousands at auction. Native families who won these honors or inherited them are holding significant pieces of community history. The elaborate silverwork and engraving on vintage championship buckles produced unique works of wearable art that collectors now hunt relentlessly. Buckles from legendary competitions and those featuring exceptional craftsmanship command premium prices from both Western memorabilia collectors and native art enthusiasts. Original ribbons, certificates, and photographs documenting these achievements provide crucial context and increase value. Trophies from tribal fairs representing excellence in traditional skills are especially valuable. Even commemorative items and participant awards have appreciated dramatically. For Native families who competed in traditional games and cultural competitions, those awards have transformed into valuable pieces documenting indigenous, athletic, and cultural traditions. Original movie posters from native-themed films of the 1,970 seconds have become collectible, though families approach this category with mixed feelings. Posters for films like Little Big Man, A Man Called Horse, and Billy Jack now sell for hundreds of dollars, despite problematic representations. Native families who saved these posters are discovering their worth to film historians and pop culture collectors. The historical significance lies in documenting how Native people were portrayed during this era. Original theatrical release posters are worth far more than reproductions. Promotional materials from the rare films that involve Native actors and consultants carry additional historical value. Press kits documenting Native participation behind the scenes are especially prized. What theater owners once discarded are now pieces documenting Native representation in cinema. Collectors understand that these films represent complex moments when Native stories reached mainstream audiences, however imperfectly told. Vintage beaded items and traditional crafts from reservation schools and cultural programs have become surprisingly collectible pieces of Native American history. Beadwork, quillwork, and other items created in arts programs now attract collector interest. Items from the Indian Arts and Crafts Board programs and similar initiatives document efforts to preserve traditional skills. Collectors now pay significant prices for well-executed traditional crafts from this era. Items that families created during cultural revitalization efforts have become valuable documentation of that renaissance. The craftsmanship combined with historical context creates artifacts worth preserving. Some collectors focus on items from specific reservations or tribal programs. Complete collections documenting craft traditions from particular communities have sold for thousands of dollars. What once seemed like school projects or hobby work has transformed into documentation of cultural preservation efforts during challenging times for Native communities. Vintage Native dolls from the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds have become highly sought-after collectibles that command premium prices. During an era when mainstream toy companies offered poor representations, traditional Native-made dolls provided authentic cultural connection. Original dolls in traditional dress created by tribal artisans now sell for hundreds or thousands of dollars to serious collectors. These dolls, with buckskin clothing, beadwork, and careful attention to tribal-specific details, provided representation that commercial toys could not match. Families who kept childhood dolls in good condition are discovering their significant value to collectors and cultural institutions. The craftsmanship and cultural accuracy of vintage Native dolls make them important artifacts from an era when indigenous children had few toys reflecting their heritage. Collectors understand that these dolls represented more than playthings. They were connections to culture and identity for Native children. Original Native American baseball memorabilia has become extremely valuable to sports collectors and tribal historians. Programs, photographs, and items from all Native teams and Native players in minor and major leagues now sell for substantial amounts at auction. Native families who saved these items are holding pieces of irreplaceable sports history. Teams like the Pendleton Buckaroos and Native players who competed professionally represented indigenous excellence in athletics. Original uniforms, equipment, and autographed items from notable Native players command significant prices. Team photographs and game documentation preserve stories that might otherwise be forgotten. Museums and private collectors actively seek this memorabilia to preserve the legacy of Native athletics. What once seemed like ordinary souvenirs from games have transformed into valuable documentation of Native contributions to American sports history. Vintage star quilts made by Native grandmothers using traditional patterns have become valuable pieces of textile art. These handmade quilts, particularly the distinctive 8-pointed star patterns common in Plains tribes, represent textile traditions with deep cultural meaning. Collectors and museums now pay substantial sums for authentic star quilts from South Dakota, Montana, and other traditional quilting regions. The vibrant colors and precise geometric patterns that characterized Native quilting traditions have influenced contemporary textile art. Families who inherited these quilts from their elders are discovering their artistic and monetary value. Each quilt tells a story through its colors, patterns, and construction, often created for giveaways or ceremonial purposes. What families once used as gifts or bedding has transformed into recognized art. Collectors prize the authenticity and craftsmanship that cannot be replicated by commercial manufacturing. Original artwork by Fritz Scholder, T.C. Cannon, and other native modernist painters has appreciated enormously in value over the decades. Paintings and prints by Institute of American Indian Arts graduates now sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars at major auction houses. Native families who purchased art during the Native Arts Renaissance of the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds are holding priceless pieces of American cultural history. Original prints and lithographs from this period have increased substantially in value. The visual art of this movement captured Native experience in bold, modern ways that challenged stereotypes. Gallery catalogs, exhibition programs, and artist-signed materials from the era also command collector attention. Families who kept artwork passed down through generations are discovering its significance to art historians and collectors worldwide. What grandparents considered meaningful decorations are now recognized as important contributions to American art history. Vintage rodeo memorabilia from Native cowboys and all Indian rodeos has become highly collectible. Original programs, photographs, and promotional materials from events like the All-American Indian Days Rodeo and Crow Fair now sell for premium prices. Native rodeo represented an important part of reservation life, and items documenting this history are prized by collectors. Families who participated in rodeos and kept their programs, buckles, and photographs are holding pieces of Western history that museums and collectors actively seek. Materials from tribal fairs and rodeos that no longer exist are especially valuable for documenting community traditions. Photographs of riders, ropers, and bull riders in action provide visual history. Championship buckles and trophies from Native rodeo events carry both artistic and historical value. Collectors understand that Native rodeo culture represented indigenous adaptation of Western traditions into distinctly Native community celebrations. Original copies of Vine Deloria Jr.'s Custer, Died for Your Sins, and other foundational Native literature, particularly first editions from the late 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds, have become valuable collectibles. Signed copies and first editions with dust jackets in good condition now sell for substantial sums at auction. For Native families who purchased these books when first released, those copies have appreciated significantly in value. Works by N. Scott Momaday, Leslie Marmon Silko, and other Native writers from this era also command collector attention. The cultural impact of this literature renaissance cannot be overstated. These books changed how Native Americans asserted their voices and how America understood indigenous perspectives. Promotional materials, author appearances, and early reviews also carry value. The literature represented a turning point when Native writers claimed authority over their own stories, a moment that collectors recognize and honor through their interest in first editions. Vintage items from Native-owned businesses and tribal enterprises have become collectible pieces of economic history. Original packaging, signs, and promotional materials from early Native business ventures now attract collector interest. Materials from smoke shops, craft cooperatives, and tourism ventures document Native entrepreneurship. Families who saved items from family businesses or tribal enterprises are discovering their historical value. Native business development represented self-determination and economic sovereignty. Original materials from successful ventures provide inspiration and documentation. Trade show displays, business cards, and advertising materials also attract collectors interested in Native economic history. Branded merchandise from reservation businesses that have since closed carries nostalgic and historical value. These items represent more than commerce. They document generations of Native entrepreneurship and community economic development against significant obstacles. Vintage photographs documenting Native family life, ceremonies, and historic events have become valuable to collectors and institutions. Original prints by Native photographers like Lee Marmon, Horace Poolaw, and Richard Throssell command substantial prices at auction. Family photograph collections that document reservation life in specific communities or time periods also attract institutional buyers. Albums and loose photographs showing everyday life, celebrations, and community gatherings provide irreplaceable historical documentation. Photographs from political protests, powwows, and family gatherings carry both historical and monetary value. Families who preserve their ancestors' photographic collections are holding important cultural archives. The visual documentation of Native American life is now recognized as essential historical material worth preserving and collecting. Institutions actively seek photographs that tell indigenous stories from Native perspectives. Original concert materials and documentation from Native rock and folk music performances have become valuable to music collectors. Materials from bands like Redbone, XIT, and Buffy Sainte-Marie concerts now sell for significant amounts. The posters, tickets, and promotional materials from these pioneering Native musicians represent important moments when Indigenous artists reached mainstream audiences. Families who attended shows and saved materials are discovering their worth to collectors and music historians. Venues on and near reservations that hosted these performances, many now closed, add to the historical significance. Backstage passes, set lists, and venue programs also carry collector value. The documentation of Native musicians performing their own music captures an era of cultural assertion through popular music. Collectors prize original materials from performances that represented Native presence in rock, folk, and popular music scenes. Vintage items from Native fraternities, sororities, and student organizations have become increasingly collectible. Original materials from groups like Alpha Pi, Omega, and other Native Greek organizations attract interest from alumni and historians. Items documenting early Native student organizing at universities command attention from collectors interested in Native education history. The cultural significance of Native student organizations in supporting students away from their communities makes their historical materials valuable. Families who inherited memorabilia from parents and grandparents attending college are discovering interest from collectors and organizational archives. Vintage photographs of gatherings, conferences, and campus events document community building. Original organizing materials and early documents from these groups carry both sentimental and monetary value. These items document the tradition of Native students, creating support networks and cultural spaces in mainstream educational institutions. Vintage 8-track tapes of Native music recordings have become collectible to audio enthusiasts and cultural preservationists. Original 8-track releases from Canyon Records and other labels documenting powwow music and Native folk artists now attract collector interest despite the format's obsolescence. Native families who kept their 8-track collections instead of discarding them are discovering renewed interest. The distinctive packaging and sometimes unique recordings found on 8-track format make them valuable to serious collectors. Some recordings exist only in 8-track format, creating variants that documentation-focused collectors seek out. The players themselves, especially portable units, also carry nostalgic value. Families cleaning out storage areas are finding that these formats they considered outdated have become collectible. The connection to an era when recorded Native music became more widely available has created a collector market for authentic original tapes. Original documentation from tribal council meetings and community gatherings has become extremely valuable to collectors and institutions. Photographs, meeting minutes, and organizational materials from important tribal decisions now sell for substantial sums through specialized dealers. Families who served in tribal government and kept documentation are holding important historical material. Original materials from community development projects and cultural preservation initiatives attract serious collector attention. Planning documents, correspondence, and committee records also carry significant value. Photographs showing elders in council or community members working together on reservation projects are especially prized. Universities and tribal museums actively collect this material to preserve tribal governance history. Families who kept boxes of materials from their service years are discovering the historical and monetary value of their personal archives, documenting indigenous self-governance and community organization. Vintage signage and artifacts from reservation trading posts and native-owned businesses that no longer exist have become valuable pieces of commercial history. Original signs, receipts, and promotional materials from stores, gas stations, and restaurants in native communities now attract collector interest. Materials from businesses that serve travelers through Indian country are especially valuable. Original advertising, letterhead, and business materials from these enterprises document economic life often overlooked in mainstream history. Families who inherited materials from grandparents who ran businesses are discovering their worth to collectors and historians. Display cases, vintage product packaging, and other physical artifacts from closed businesses have sold for significant amounts at auction. This memorabilia documents the economic self-determination that Native communities maintained despite limited resources and discrimination. Original recordings and memorabilia from Native radio programming have become collectible pieces of broadcast history. Materials from programs on stations that served Native communities, including KTDB and other reservation-based stations, now attract serious collector attention. The broadcasters who transmitted in native languages and served as community voices left behind memorabilia that historians actively seek. Original recordings of language programs, cultural shows, and community announcements document an era when native radio provided crucial communication. Promotional items and station materials from native-focused broadcasting carry collector value. Photographs of announcers, station equipment, and remote broadcasts provide visual documentation of this important cultural history. Families connected to these stations through employment or regular listening often kept materials that are now considered valuable historical artifacts, documenting Native media and language preservation efforts. Vintage cookbooks and handwritten recipes from Native family kitchens have become treasured collectibles connecting culinary traditions across generations. Original copies of Native cookbooks and tribal community cookbooks now command attention from collectors interested in indigenous foodways. Recipe cards and notebooks compiled by grandmothers document culinary traditions and traditional food preparation techniques. Handwritten instructions, personal notes, and ingredient lists tell stories that printed books cannot capture. Collectors and food historians actively seek these personal archives to understand how Native families preserved traditional cooking knowledge. Church and community cookbooks from Native congregations and tribal centers have become especially valuable historical documents. The recipes preserved in these pages connect families to ancestors and to cultural heritage through food traditions. What families once considered kitchen references have become valuable documentation of Native American culinary history and traditional ecological knowledge preserved through cooking practices. Which of these vintage items from Native American households do you remember most? Share your stories in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss another journey through Indigenous memory and cultural preservation.